Working on a time clock was a foreign concept, and man-made tools felt like children's toys in his hands. His temper grew shorter by the hour, and he invariably got fired, usually in a matter of days. His record was a 17-minute stint as a warehouse worker at Jake's Super Discount. Taking orders from a pimple-faced manager barely out of high school had Thor so steamed he drove a forklift directly into a new shipment of diapers and canned beans. He lasted longest as a strip club bouncer, nearly 2 months, before he stepped into a brawl and single-handedly sent 3 patrons, 2 bartenders, and a waitress to the hospital. At least he hadn't minded being surrounded by naked women while it lasted. Thor squinted his eyes closed and struggled to relax, knowing full well he was working at cross purposes with himself. It wasn't in his nature to be calm. Tranquility was a far cry from what he was created for. But he'd burned through 6 jobs in just the past 2 years, with long periods of unemployment in between, and he needed to keep his cool. He opened his eyes and reached for a fresh toner cartridge. Weighing the plastic carefully in his hands, he chanced a furtive glance into the office to make sure Odin wasn't watching, then delicately grasped the cartridge's protective tape between his fingertips and peeled it back as slowly as he could manage. "Just think of it as an egg," he mumbled. That did it. He could feel Odin's watchful eye on him again. Still balancing the cartridge in his hands, Thor gritted his teeth as his face and neck flushed red. "Don't break it, don't break it, don't break it," Thor chanted silently. "You're not the god of chaos." Thor cracked a smile, remembering some of Loki's misfortunes. If Thor was having difficulty adjusting to the life of an ordinary guy, Loki had it worse. The god of mischief and mayhem had practically gone underground. Loki was the only one of the gods who had any power left, though he had no control over it, and modern technology was no match for the god of entropy. It had started with a few blown light bulbs and burnt-up sewing machines, but quickly escalated over the ensuing decades. It was entirely possible Loki had been responsible for the 1963 Chicago blackout, and even the mild-mannered nature god Freyr had nearly blown a gasket at his own Super Bowl party. As soon as Loki got within 5 yards of Freyr's state-of-the-art 50-inch flat-screen TV, the display shorted out with a tiny pop and a puff of smoke 3 minutes before kickoff. Thor dragged himself across the carpet and paused on his knees before the photocopier. He felt like a ridiculous supplicant with his humble offering of toner, worshipping in a mechanical altar. "Peace," Thor whispered to himself, eyes half closed and head bowed. An odd mantra for the god of thunder and lightning, but it got the job done. Shanti. Freya had taught him that Sanskrit word, and he liked the feel of it on his tongue, though he would have preferred a streak of old Viking curses. "Principal Wyatt?" Thor looked up, startled to find the not unattractive red-haired office secretary hovering over him as she leaned into Odin's office. He fumbled the cartridge and nearly lost his grip on it, but caught it just before it hit the carpet and sprayed more black toner dust across the floor. The wheels of Odin's office chair squeaked as he turned to face her. "Janine," came the chief god's grumbled reply as he knocked back a couple of aspirin with a gulp of coffee from a Portland State University mug, a gag gift from his wife. Odin glared at the university's mascot emblazoned on the side, Victor E. Viking carrying a football, then slammed the mug down on top of his desk. Hard. Black coffee sloshed over the rim and onto the piles of work orders, permission slips, and other documents awaiting his review and signature. Janine jumped back, nearly stumbling over Thor, still crouched on the floor. Embarrassed, she held a hand to her chest and glanced down at Thor. I'm so sorry," she stammered. Thor just smiled and nodded. "Janine," Odin called her again. She recovered herself and stepped tentatively into his office. "Yes, these are the phone messages that came in overnight for you?" She held a collection of pink papers out to him. Odin lifted himself from behind the desk and lumbered across the floor toward her. Janine held the papers as far away from herself as possible and tried unsuccessfully to keep from wincing as he approached. Odin stopped in front of her. With a gracious dip of the head, he gently took the papers from her outstretched hand. "Thank you, Janine." He tried to smile at her, but as soon as his eye met hers, she stifled a high-pitched squeak and dashed back to her desk, narrowly skirting Thor's hulking form along the way. Odin sighed and shook his head. He stepped to the doorway and stood over his son, watching him. Thor ignored his father, or pretended to. He closed his eyes, took another deep breath, and gingerly slipped the toner cartridge into place inside the copy machine. His eyes popped open in an immediate frown when the cartridge didn't click into position, but instead of hammering it into place with his fist, as he sorely wanted to do, Thor visualized a cool waterfall gently pouring restorative waters over his head and down his back. He reached deeper into the machine and gently pressed down on the cartridge, smiling in satisfaction and relief when he heard the familiar sound of plastic snapping into place. "There now," he said for Odin's benefit as he leaned back from the photocopier. "Piece of cake." Thor nodded triumphantly up at his father, but then his face fell as he surveyed the litter of copier parts strewn about him on all sides, parts he'd unceremoniously ripped out of the machine trying to get to the malfunctioning toner cartridge in the first place. Swallowing a chuckle, Odin rested against the door jamb and crossed his arms over his chest. "Piece of cake, was it?" Bloody, godless hell. Kneeling on the floor, Thor pressed his palms against his thighs, jaw clenched. What he wouldn't have given for a thunderbolt. One big enough to obliterate all photocopier machines across the globe, any factories that might manufacture more of them, and the person or persons responsible for their invention in the first place. Was that too much to ask? He doubted anyone anywhere really needed 150 collated copies of anything anyway. Thor picked up a small, odd-shaped plastic part in his toner-smeared fingers and rotated it first left, then right. He had no idea what it was or where it was supposed to go. He'd have to consult the manual, a massive 6-inch, 3-ring binder packed full of enough useless diagrams and minuscule print to make the old god's head hurt. He hated having to consult the manual. So that's Thor versus the photocopier. Thanks very much. Like I said, we have copies of Valhalla here for sale this evening. It's also available in ebook. The second volume is an ebook only right now, but the print copy is coming soon. You can also visit me online, and I've started building an online glossary. So if there are any terms that you have difficulty with as you're reading along, come visit me. I'll explain what it means. Thanks very much.